There is a loneliness that doesn't stem from a lack of company, but from an abundance of thought, an inner silence that grows as consciousness expands. What do you do when you see the world with a clarity that others don't see or can't bear to see? Emil Cioran wrote that to have consciousness is to be poisoned. Intelligence, when too sharp, severs the ties with life's simplicity. For some, it's a privilege. For others, a curse. What happens when the mind becomes too vast to fit into the world? History is not kind to those who think too much. Hamlet hesitated to the point of madness. Nietzsche stared into the abyss for so long that the abyss stared back. Pascal said that all of humanity's problems stem from its inability to sit quietly, alone in a room. Were they all condemned by their own lucidity? Science seems to confirm this discomfort. Studies show that people with a high IQ tend to socialize less and worry more. They don't need company as much, or perhaps they perceive the superficiality of interactions too soon. Intelligence, instead of bringing people closer, isolates. But why? This video offers no easy answers, because Cioran never did. Here we delve into an essential human dilemma. Does extreme intelligence inevitably lead to loneliness? Or is it just a side effect of those who see the world without illusions? Lucidity has a price. The question is it worth paying? There is a sadness that only lucidity knows, an exhaustion that doesn't come from the body, but from thought. The one who sees too much feels too much. The one who feels too much carries a burden that others don't even perceive. Emil Cioran, the philosopher of disillusionment, knew this better than anyone. The more we think, the further we move from life, he wrote. But what does this separation mean? For Cioran, thinking was a chronic disease. The mind, when too free, is not satisfied with simple answers. It digs, excavates, dismantles every certainty, reduces every idea to dust. And when there is nothing left but dust, what is there to cling to? Existence becomes a grotesque theater, where every human gesture carries a tragic weight. Eating, sleeping, loving, all this can seem trivial to someone who has already understood too much. This is the tragedy of those who think more than necessary. To live requires a degree of blindness. The child plays because he doesn't calculate death. The lover gives themselves over because they ignore the transience of desire. But the hyper-aware cannot play, cannot surrender. They see the invisible threads that hold the spectacle of life, and by seeing them, they lose the capacity to believe in the charm. Cioran called it the horror of being lucid. It's not a metaphor. He truly saw intelligence as a nightmare. If only we had the courage to go mad, he wrote, because at least madness would be a relief. It's no coincidence that history is filled with geniuses lost in their own thought. Nietzsche broke with reality. Van Gogh cut off his own ear. Pascal, obsessed with the emptiness of existence, trembled at the thought of the eternal silence of the universe. And so, we return to the question, does intelligence lead to loneliness? Not by choice, but by gravity. The more a mind expands, the harder it is to find company on its level. The cruel irony is that this expansion doesn't bring happiness, only distance. But there's a second, even crueler problem. The more a person isolates themselves, the more they think. And the more they think, the more they isolate themselves. A cycle that closes in on itself. For Cioran, the error was not in the world, but in the very act of thinking. To have one idea more than necessary is already a tragedy, he said. If this is true, the real problem of the intelligent is not loneliness. It's the fact that, even alone, their minds keep talking and never stop. Intelligence is a slow-acting poison. At first, it seems like a gift, a sharp mind, capable of understanding what others don't, of seeing patterns where no one sees anything. But with time, the curse is revealed. Because to understand too much is an invitation to solitude. Science confirms what Cioran felt deep down. Psychological studies show that people with high IQs relate to the world differently. Evolutionary psychologist Satoshi Kanazawa discovered something surprising. The smarter an individual is, the less they feel the need for frequent social interactions. The so-called savanna theory suggests that our minds still carry traces of primitive life, where small groups and constant relationships were essential for survival. But intelligence acts as a mutation, allowing certain individuals to escape that atavistic need. They don't need the group as much. They can survive alone. But surviving is not the same as living. Cioran would say this social independence is a cruel illusion. Intelligence can numb the need for company, but it doesn't eliminate the suffering that comes with its absence.
He wrote, "The worst torment is not being misunderstood, but having no one with whom to be misunderstood. The problem is not just being alone, but being alone inside one's own mind. The loneliness of the intelligent is not physical, it is existential. And there is another side effect, emotional hyper-awareness. Research indicates that highly intelligent individuals are often more prone to deep introspection, which can amplify feelings of sadness, anxiety, and boredom. Psychologist Adam Grant calls it the curse of overthinking. The brilliant mind not only analyzes everything, but also overanalyzes. Every word spoken, every gesture received, every decision made, everything becomes an infinite web of possibilities and regrets. Dostoevsky captured this anguish perfectly in Crime and Punishment. Raskolnikov, the protagonist, isolates himself not because he wants to, but because his mind allows him no other option. He drowns in his own analysis, deconstructing every act, every thought, until the reality around him loses meaning. Excessive thinking distances him from others, but also from himself. Cioran saw this fate as inevitable. The mind that expands does not shrink back to its original size. The problem with lucidity is not just seeing too much, but being unable to stop seeing. The lucid man is the one who refuses to be fooled by anything, not even by happiness. And here is the paradox. Extreme intelligence can lead to isolation, but loneliness, in turn, amplifies thought. A closed, inescapable cycle. The question, then, shifts. Is loneliness really a choice for the intelligent? Or is it simply the consequence of a world that was not made to withstand so much consciousness? To think too much is like holding a sharp knife without being able to put it down. At first, the mind seems like a powerful instrument, a tool for control. But the more intelligence turns inward, the more it becomes a torture mechanism. Excessive thinking doesn't illuminate, it burns. Cioran knew this better than anyone. For him, thought was a disease, not a luxury or a gift, but an unbearable burden. The mind is an anthill of doubts that never runs out. The problem with intelligence is not just seeing too much, but being unable to stop seeing. It is a continuous flow, a torrent of consciousness that cannot be interrupted. Modern neuroscience suggests that Cioran was right. Studies show that people with high intelligence are more prone to anxiety, depression, and obsessive disorders. Compulsive thinking is not a sign of genius, but of exhaustion. Rumination, the act of incessantly repeating the same thoughts, is one of the greatest predictors of mental suffering. The brain does not rest. It chews on its own thought until nothing is left but anguish. Nietzsche was one of the great examples of this intellectual prison. He lived for his ideas until his ideas devoured him. His radical thought, sharp as a razor, became increasingly unbearable until his mind, one day, shattered. Thought is the great misfortune of the human species, said Cioran. But why? Because thinking too much paralyzes. Excessive analysis destroys spontaneity, corrodes desire, weakens the will to act. Hamlet, consumed by doubt, is the perfect portrait of this. To be or not to be? That question wasn't a philosophical dilemma, but a paralyzing poison. He didn't live, he only doubted. His mind was a trap. What if Hamlet had been less intelligent? What if he had felt more and thought less? This is the big question. Thought should be a tool, but for the excessively conscious, it becomes a prison. As Cioran wrote, excess of lucidity transforms a human being into a spectator of their own ruin. But there is a final provocation. What if the problem is not intelligence itself, but the use we make of it? The mind can be an instrument of analysis or a mechanism of self-destruction. What it becomes depends on what we do with what we know. Loneliness is a tragedy for those who suffer it, and a privilege for those who master it. The one who cannot stand their own company is doomed to get lost in others. But the one who learns to find refuge within themselves needs no external refuge. Cioran said that loneliness is not a circumstance, but a destiny. The lucid man is only saved if he accepts his isolation as a necessity. There are therefore two lonelinesses, the imposed and the chosen. The first is an exile, the second, a sanctuary. The question is, when intelligence leads someone to loneliness, is this a burden or a liberation? Arthur Schopenhauer, another great pessimist, saw loneliness as the mark of greatness. For him, a man's happiness depended on the quality of his thoughts, not the quantity of his company. Solitude is the destiny of all exceptional spirits, he wrote. His argument was simple. Mediocrity needs the crowd, but genius flourishes in the distance. Nietzsche reinforced this idea by saying that what is done for the love of solitude is what matters in life, and yet, both philosophers ended their lives in devastating isolation. The problem with chosen loneliness is that, once embraced, it rarely allows for return. Intellectual independence has a cost, the impossibility of belonging. Here, an intriguing paradox enters. Intelligence, by pushing someone away from others, can open up space for genuine freedom. Cioran observed that loneliness is an absolute for those who can no longer accept the world. The one who cannot believe in social illusions, in the rituals of coexistence, in the dance of appearances, ends up preferring the company of their own thought. But this choice has a price, becoming a stranger to others, and often to themselves. The most radical example of this logic can be found in fiction, Dr. Manhattan, from Watchmen, represents intelligence taken to the extreme. As his mind expands, his connection to humanity dissolves. He no longer feels like others, desires like others, or suffers like others. Loneliness is not a punishment for him, but an inevitable consequence of his lucidity about the universe. But the question persists, is there a middle ground? Or is loneliness the inevitable destiny of those who see too much? For Cioran, the answer was already given. There are moments when the loneliness of a spirit resembles a crime. The problem is that, once the path of mental independence is chosen, any return to the world seems like a surrender. If lucidity is a sentence of isolation, is there a path that doesn't lead to loneliness? Or is all elevated intelligence condemned to an emotional exile? Cioran harbored no hope. For him, there is no remedy for consciousness. Once the gears behind the human spectacle are seen, it is impossible to be dazzled again. Innocence cannot be rebuilt. The world loses its magic. Gestures become predictable. Life itself seems rehearsed. For many, this is the root of the isolation, not intelligence itself, but what it destroys. The pleasure of illusion. But history suggests there are ways out. Dostoevsky, perhaps the most tormented of writers, found an antidote to his own lucidity in art. He wrote The Brothers Karamazov as a cry against nihilism, an effort at reconstruction. Tolstoy, after a lifetime of disillusionment, embraced faith as a refuge against the weight of excessive thought. Nietzsche himself, before his breakdown, tried to create a philosophy that affirmed life instead of denying it. And there is science. One of the most fascinating studies on happiness, conducted by Harvard University for over 80 years, showed an undeniable fact. Human connections are the greatest factor in well-being. Neither money, nor genius, nor status outweighs the impact of deep relationships. Even for the most intelligent, absolute loneliness is not a solution. It's a risk. But then, how to reconcile lucidity and belonging? How to prevent intelligence from becoming a prison? Cioran seemed to give a clue. even unintentionally. All that remains for us is to laugh at despair. Perhaps the path is not to escape lucidity, but to learn to carry it more lightly, to use it to create, to question without suffocating, to observe without completely withdrawing. Intelligence can lead to loneliness, but loneliness is not synonymous with abandonment. The secret might be in finding those who also see too much, who also feel too much, who understand without the need for explanations. Total loneliness is not a destiny, but a choice. And perhaps, in the end, true wisdom lies in knowing when to accept the silence and when to allow another voice to fill it. If you've made it this far, it's because this topic has touched you in some way. Perhaps you have already felt the weight of excessive thought on your own skin. Perhaps you have already experienced that peculiar loneliness that doesn't come from a lack of people, but from a lack of real connection. The world seems full, noisy, but at the same time, distant. Here on the channel, we talk about this in depth, without beating around the bush. We bring reflections that challenge, question, and make you think. If this is valuable to you, consider supporting the channel. You can become a member and get access to exclusive content, or use super thanks to help directly in the creation of new videos. But, above all, just by watching, leaving your comment, and sharing, you are already part of this community that refuses to accept easy answers. Because, in the end, thinking too much can isolate. But when we find others who also see beyond the surface, we realize that we are not truly alone.